Hello and welcome to the EDD 670C Theory of Improvement and Driver Diagrams presentation. In this presentation, we'll be going over the theory of improvement and the dissertation practice. And by the end of this presentation, you will be able to create a driver diagram based on your problem practice and your inquiry questions. And then you can apply the driver diagram to a draft theory of improvement. A theory of improvement is developed to articulate the hypothesis that you have about your problem of practice and outline how changes in practice will lead to improvement. It can create a bridge between theory and concepts to real-life application, and it can answer the question, what can I introduce and why? So developing your theory of improvement, you have a broad and diverse understanding of your problem of practice and how it may be solved, and you'll want to consider all relevant stakeholders, including the experiences of others outside your immediate community or setting. So when developing your theory of improvement, you'll want to ask yourself if you know what other schools are doing. Have there been leading examples or best practices? Have there been failed experiments? Have others engaged in a cycle of continuous improvement? And has there been a similar solution in other settings, maybe non-educational? Maybe you need to look to the business world, or maybe you need to look in other educational settings that are just outside of your typical community. You also need to know the existing literature and the relevant resources. When you develop your theory of improvement, it should answer the question, what will work to improve the problem? So how do you see the change in practice sparking improvement? And it should provide for you a roadmap of analyzing your problem of practice to tackling the problem during the testing phase or your PDSA cycles, plan, do, study, act. So there can be large and small goals for change, and they both play an important part of the focus of your work. And you can ask yourself the questions, where are the areas of influence that might move the needle on improving the overall aim that you try to achieve? And what are smaller events and actions that can increase the outcomes that you seek? So you'll want to stay broad as you're brainstorming. Think about your fishbone diagram and how you can flare out your fishbone diagram to really add some more thoughts and connections and resources. But eventually, of course, you will want to narrow some things down as well. But nothing's too big or too small at this point to be included. The driver diagram is developed to visually map how systems function, and it can consolidate all relevant thoughts, theories, and approaches to improvement. So you've already drafted a driver diagram in your previous terms, but this is just a refresher and another opportunity to dive deep into your driver diagram because it will really inform chapters 2 and 3 and really your entire dissertation study moving forward. So the driver diagram will be refined over time. Of course, you've already heard me talk about refining and revising and revisiting. The driver diagram will develop as you continue to learn and understand your problem of practice. It will eventually come up or help you come up with a name for your theory improvement. And a driver diagram will allow you to narrow your focus to high leverage areas or those areas that might have the biggest opportunities for change and improvement. A driver diagram will show you where change can happen and will help you test your hypotheses about what might work. It will also create an illustration of how your improvements will occur because it is a visual diagram. So here is an overall picture of the driver diagram. This should be relatively familiar already. And there are some slides in this presentation that I'll go over more quickly. I encourage you to pause, stop, revisit this video as you dive deeper into your own work and developing your own driver diagram. So a driver diagram has 4 components: the aim statement, which addresses the question what you are trying to accomplish, and the drivers, which are the high leverage areas that play a role in influencing the aim. The drivers are, again, those high leverage areas, and each driver is influenced by smaller steps. They can be broad categories that can help you get at your aim. They are essential for progressing towards the aim. And secondary drivers influence primary drivers and can be tangible opportunities for change. Secondary drivers affect the day-to-day work and can be implemented very quickly, immediately in the near term, and there are small changes that can influence primary drivers. So these secondary drivers are really again, immediate. They aren't changing the whole school or culture. They're things that you can think about and do very quickly on a dime. So the primary drivers are the what. What needs to happen to get at the aim? What are the big things that can influence the aim? And the secondary drivers are the where. Where will you implement changes? Where does the primary driver disintegrate in practice? And then you can think about the aim statement. The aim, again, addresses what you're trying to accomplish, the drivers of those high leverage areas. And so we're moving to now change ideas. The change ideas are the small changes that affect the secondary drivers. So they're tied very closely to those secondary drivers, and they are small enough to test immediately. They can be so small that you might just think about them as being a tweak as to how you do things on a daily basis, and they can be your entry point to your theory of improvement. So you can look at the image here, and you can see that the examples here are quite small, tangible, immediately implementable. For example, returning quizzes with feedback and revision time. That's something that you can do on a small scale. It doesn't have to be, excruciatingly large culture changes in your school site. So here is an example of a driver diagram that's filled in. You can see the aim statement has discrete time points and numerical changes that they are looking to address. And the change ideas on the far right, again, are small and implementable. I want you to also see that there are a number of primary and secondary drivers as well as change ideas. Some go to just one box and some arrows, go to multiple boxes. So you can think about change ideas that might influence multiple primary drivers or secondary drivers. You can think about secondary drivers and how they might implement or impact multiple primary drivers. Here is another example of a driver diagram. You might want to pause and explore what this looks like. And same thing here. I'll move right along though. I really like this sentence prompt check because it helps you put together your ideas. So if you want to finish this sentence, you would input your aim, one single primary driver, one single secondary driver, and one single change idea. If as you're reading the sentence out loud, it makes sense, then you're on the right track. If it doesn't make sense or it feels like the ideas are coming backwards or maybe one thing does not lead to another, then take a step back, rethink. Maybe you need to change a primary driver to a secondary driver, or maybe you need to scrap it all together. Similarly, when you're looking at the primary or the driver diagram and you want to check right to left, you can start with the change idea and end up with your aim, asking why. If you want to check on your driver diagram going left to right, you can start with the aim and move to the change idea and ask how. I really suggest that you go through these checks once you have a draft of your primary or of your driver diagram so that you can just see how your ideas are working and flowing. So if you need to know where to start, I think all of you already have a working draft, but there are some opportunities or suggestions of where to start. I personally like to start at the aim or the change idea. For me, it's easier to start at one end or the other, but you could start at the drivers or start anywhere in the middle, right? But you can ask yourself what the literature is telling you, right? And what have you observed in your experiences as a practitioner, as an educator? If you start with your aim, once you have one driver, you can drill down into the secondary drivers and then into change ideas. And if you start with possible solutions and you have a change idea, map it onto your secondary driver, keeping in mind how it will help you address your aim. But don't be a solutionist with a quick fix. We really want to think through the problem of practice and these different ways of coming to change. So where can I find possible drivers? You can look at your students, look at your teachers and colleagues at your school sites. You can consider the user perspective, so who might be the audience for your change ideas, and you can consider what changes you would expect to see. And of course, you can always consult the research, the literature, outside experts, professional learning communities, that sort of thing. So you want to think about change ideas that will produce the greatest impact, the most immediate return, the most value as deemed by the institution, the most excitement for you while working, the greatest buy-in from stakeholders, and of course, we might need to think about cost-effective solutions. As you implement these change ideas, process questions will emerge. So for whom is what kind of change working? In other words, what works where and why, right? And for whom? How do you know it's working? Under what conditions is it working? So make sure that you're asking yourself those three questions as you're working through your driver diagram. So you might need to revisit or refine your problem of practice. You already know that that's the name of the game program. And again, as a refresher, a problem of practice is a persistent, contextualized, and specific issue embedded in the work of a professional practitioner. That's you. And it addresses and has the potential to result in improved understanding, experiences, and outcomes. So you should be able to state your problem of practice as a statement. This is something that I have given you feedback on before. And here are some examples of my real life professional problems of practice. So my problem of practice is that too few first-year college students graduate within 4 years. I have another similar problem of practice of my problem of practice is that faculty and students do not seem to engage meaningfully in asynchronous online courses. Of course, that's not the case with this one. And my problem of practice is that only 48% of students take 15 credits per term or more. So these problems have real consequences. But as you're working through your problem of practice, make sure you can state it as a statement itself, not a question. My problem of practice is. So on this slide, I show you what the consequences are to these problems. You can go ahead and read that on your own. Look at this example of good problems to analyze. So the problem focus area is relatively, it's actually relatively narrow already in some of these, but then when they move to the problem statement, they're getting even more specific and they're using a specific angle for their problem focus area. So go ahead and read these and think about whether or not you have a problem statement or whether you have a problem focus area. And use this checklist as you work through and refine your problem of practice. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks.